Hello, colleagues. If you could again take your seats and insert your voting cards for this final session of Committee 1. We're still a few short of a quorum. Good afternoon, colleagues. We now have a quorum, and I have the list restored in front of me, and I'm checking that against my photograph. We do have one observer, that's right, who was on before. If they could unpress their button, please. I will invite observers later. The list looks identical. I think the Gambia are missing at the moment, but that's possibly because they're not here, so I will give them the floor later if they still wish. So with that, we will move on. The next speaker on my list is the United Republic of Tanzania. So Tanzania, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The United Republic of Tanzania is deeply concerned with the lack of consultation by the EU and therefore reluctant to accept the proposed amendments. However, in the spirit of cooperation, we are ready to accept one of the related decision on decision 18.166 by the EU. On decision 18.168, we are opposed to the amendment proposed by the EU as it is contrary to the resolution 10.14 and as already dealt with by the Lenge states having quotas for Leopard. With regard to decision 18.169, contrary on what has been alluded by some parties, the proposed guidance on the making NDF for trade in leopard and hunting trophies is irrelevant because the CITES Secretariat has already offered guidance during the quota review process and no party accepted it. Notwithstanding, quota reviews were based on sound science and the Animal Committee approved them. We possess the state of the art that adaptive management poses where monitoring is a key element and a guide wise and sustainable use of the species. We are not inclined to accept unnecessary and burdensome activities which has the potential to distract our management practices. However, as stated in decision 18.166, we are more than ready to share the knowledge, experience, and the best practice with parties in need, such as some of the parties in West Africa that appear to lack proper wildlife management regimes. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanzania. I give the floor now to Senegal, followed by Zimbabwe.
Thank you very much, Chair. The export quotas in Resolution Conf 1014 shouldn't be acceptable to CITES. The information has been outdated in several years, so despite the very critical threats despite the critical threats for the species, we therefore require a scientific analysis or review by experts in order to confirm that these quotas do not put the species in danger. We cannot accept quotas not supported by science, and therefore we would like to invite all parties of CITES to suspend all quotas for leopard until scientific analysis carried out. On the document, Chair, as for the recommendations in paragraph 7, it would be necessary to explain the reason why we have changed the quotas from 500 to 20 individuals for Ethiopia, and give the reasoning for why other countries, we haven't done the same for other countries for this same species. Thank you.
Thank you, Senegal. I think the reasons are set out in the document and relate to the process that the Animals Committee has gone through over previous COP, this and a previous COP cycle. I now can give the, well, I said Zimbabwe, and then I will give the floor to the Gambia. So Zimbabwe, then the Gambia.
Thank you, Chair. Zimbabwe takes note of the report by the Standing Committee as presented by Chair of the Animals Committee. Zimbabwe is a leopard trophy hunting country, and it does so sustainably through an adaptive management system and a participatory approach to quota setting. Zimbabwe submitted a science-based periodic review on leopards. It was considered under the Animals and Standing Committee. As range state, we do not aim to harvest the total national quota. We only harvest trophies which are of recommended age, and that does not have a negative impact on the remaining wild populations. We do spore and camera trapping surveys to establish our leopard quotas to guide all harvesting. Zimbabwe's leopard population is stable and growing in some areas. Zimbabwe is in support of the recommendations by the CITES Secretariat on Botswana. However, we are concerned by decision 18.169 Rev CoP19C directed to the Secretariat, which states that in cooperation with range states and relevant experts, develop guidance that can assist parties in the making of non-detriment findings for trade in leopard hunting trophies in compliance with Resolution Conf 1014, Rev 4, COP16. Share the draft guidance with the Animals Committee for its review, make such guidance available on the CITES website, and encourage its use by the relevant parties. We believe, as range states, we have robust NDFs in use and that we have used before to assess the impact of trophy hunting. What we need is to share information and experience to improve the current NDF guidelines that are in use. On the proposal by EU, we are not in agreement with the proposed amendment on decision 18.168, as they did not consult with the leopard range states. We agree with submissions on Botswana on resolution 10.14. We cannot go against a resolution. Please note, periodic reviews are burdensome on range states. No amendment to resolution 10.14 apart from the deletion of Kenya and Malawi quotas as discussed in the CITES committees. Therefore, this proposed review is contrary to the same regulation that is regulating this trade. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Zimbabwe. I'll give the floor now to the Gambia, followed by Burkina Faso.
Thank you. When the CITES party set export quota for species, as it has done for leopards, those quotas are supposed to be based on science and non-detrimental to the survival of the species. However, for decades, the CITES parties have approved unreasonable high leopard export quotas, even while the leopard population has declined. The continued approval of quotas with no scientific basis is undermining the purpose of CITES and calling its decision into question. We urge the parties to adopt a regular, scientifically robust review of leopard export quotas and to suspend leopard export quotas until they can withstand scientific scrutiny. Therefore, the Gambia supports the decision in the document as amended. Thank you.
Thank you. The Gambia, I give the floor to Burkina Faso, followed by Uganda.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Chair. Burkina Faso would like to alert all parties on a 2019 publication done by a group of researchers on the conservation of animal from the Oxford University, which concluded that during several decades, the CITES institutions have approved quotas without a scientific basis. The CITES quotas are adjusted regularly, but the quotas haven't really fulfilled their function within the convention. And I close quote. As such, Burkina Faso would like to congratulate the Standing Committee via the Animal Committee for the preparation of this document and for submitting it to this COP19. And we would like to invite all parties to review regularly and rigorously their quotas to make sure that these quotas are science-based. We would also like to call upon all parties to suspend all leopard quotas until Decision 18.169 on their creation. Of a guideline for non-detrimental findings for trade in leopard hunting trophies, and this is the reason why I would like to support the document 51 and its recommendations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Burkina Faso. I give the floor to Uganda and then Liberia.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, Uganda wishes to congratulate the Standing Committee for submitting this document that makes very important recommendations. Chair, we take note of the guidance by parties and the committee that we need to undertake regular assessments to guide quota setting and determination based on the situation on the ground. We also observe the comments made by some parties to halt trade. Chair, we feel that we need to have faith in the committees that we set up, especially the technical committees. And when we come here, we should be able to review and consider some of their recommendations. The Animals Committee receives regular reports from parties, for instance, Uganda, and we think the assessments and the recommendations made by the Standing Committee here are based on the recommendations from some of these committees, and it's in our view that we adopt the recommendations made in this very document. Chair, finally, we would like to differ from the calls and the appeals by some parties that the unilateral decision be made to halt utilization in the respective countries. So we align ourselves to the submissions made by Tanzania and Zimbabwe. We thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Uganda. I give the floor to Liberia, followed by New Zealand.
Thank you, Chair. Liberia would like to first of all say thank you to the Standing Committee for presentation of document 51. And we would like to support previous comment made by our fellow colleagues from Niger, Mali, Kenya. And we are concerned about the fact that the guardians on making of non-detriment findings for trade in leopard hunting trophy has not yet been desired and developed. And at the same time, export quota for leopards remain high and quotas lack a scientific basic. We therefore urge this, and we urge this COP19 to consider to suspend all quotas until the non-detriment finding guardians is completed, and the Animal Committee and Standing Committee have opportunity to review it. So with this, Liberia therefore support the amendment for document 51. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Liberia. I give the floor now to New Zealand, followed by Zambia.
Yes, Mr. Chair. When the Animals Committee considered the quotas for leopard hunting trophies, I guess I was surprised at how wide some of the population estimates were, what the size of the range of estimates. They were incredibly wide, and so there's the potential that populations are being overestimated if you take the upper end of those large ranges. And we've heard, I think, both from Kenya and about how difficult it is to get population estimates for leopards, and encouraged to hear that Botswana is undertaking a thorough survey at present. So that's really good to hear. But we were also concerned, one of my colleagues on the committee noted that some of the quotas represented somewhere between 7 and 15% of the estimated population of certain parties, and that would seem unsustainably high for a species like leopard. And so New Zealand would support the EU recommendation that we have a review on a fairly regular basis of all of the hunting trophy quota. Thank you.
Thank you, New Zealand. I give the floor to Zambia, then China.
Thank you, Chair. The amendment made by the EU poses no real threats or issues with Zambia, although we are disappointed by the lack of consultation by the Secretariat and the EU. Zambia would like to remind this committee that this is a convention of the parties who should make decisions. Having said that, Chair, we are hesitant to accept 18.166 and do not support 18.168 due to the lack of consultation. In addition, Chair, Zambia has a major range of leopards. We have been consistent in providing quotas that are way below what is provided, and we have a monitoring system in place. Chair, and we don't really see the need why the guidelines should be developed now when we've already submitted NDAs that have not been questioned. So why should that matter arise now? I submit, Chair.
Thank you, Zambia. I give the floor to China, then Eswatini.
Thank you, Chair. China would like to remind the delegates that the Animals Committee recommended adoption of the quota. And China suggests that the views of the majorities of range states be respected. Thank you, Chair.
I give the floor now to Eswatini, followed by Switzerland.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be short and brief. Eswatini is aligning itself with the submission made by Tanzania and Zimbabwe. Thank you.
Thank you, Eswatini. Benin was on the list before lunch, but I'm not sure if they are back or their card isn't inserted, but they're appearing as a grey line, so I'm assuming they're not here. I'll give the floor to Switzerland.
Thank you, Chair. I just would like to remind the committee here that what the Animals Committee did, that we were instructed to look at an analysis of the parties presented to the Animals Committee of their way of managing their leopard populations and to judge whether the quotas that they had set that are listed in the resolution are not detrimental to the survival of the species in the wild. So that was our task, and we looked at these cases and we considered that the quotas were not detrimental to the survival of the species in many of these countries. So we did an analysis of an NDF, a non-detriment finding by these parties. So I don't quite see why this is now questioned again, because we have exactly done that. And for the resolutions that the Secretariat, for the decisions that the Secretariat proposes for continuation, they were decisions that were already there, but they have not been fulfilled yet. That's why the Secretariat proposes them to continue work that is still outstanding, that the Conference of the Parties asked of parties. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Switzerland, I give you the floor to United States.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The U.S. wishes to align itself with the comments just made by Switzerland and the AC Chair. At AC 31, the U.S. had some initial concerns on the 3 countries where the quotas had not yet been reviewed by the Animals Committee. However, it was persuaded by Botswana's new adaptive management regime and additional information that they presented at AC 31 so that the United States at that time supported a recommendation from AC, which is the decision before us now, that the quota for the population in Botswana was presently set at a level non-detrimental to the survival of the species in the wild. And therefore, we agree with what the AC Chair just said and support the decisions as they are here and as we've heard from the range countries. Thank you.
Thank you, United States. I give the floor to Japan.
Thank you, Chair. Regarding our comment earlier, after listening carefully the range states intervention and the AC Chair supports the original text, now we are aligning ourselves with those countries. Thank you.
I've got no further requests on the floor from parties other than Benin, which still appears on my screen, but I'm assuming isn't here. Or their card isn't in properly. I will take perhaps a couple of interventions from observers. And just let me see. Okay, I will take CIC to begin with. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the CIC and a number of other sustainable use organizations, the list of which we will be providing to the Secretariat. Chair, we would like to remind the parties that as a result of the species review, there is no evidence that the adopted quota by the CITES outlined in the resolution COP 10.14 had ever to be considered as being an unsustainable or even detrimental. The conservation and management of leopards in Africa is one of the really great CITES success stories since the adoption of the respective CITES resolution at the 4th meeting of the parties. The quota system has proven to be an excellent and useful tool for leopard conservation and sustainable use, except for the stricter domestic measures that in some instances have seriously impeded beneficial trade. The parties should also congratulate the range states that are implementing the quota system for carrying forward robust adaptive management system that secure the survival of the largest and most successful leopard populations around the globe. Chair, we recommend the parties adopt what was agreed upon at the Standing Committee earlier this year in France. Thank you.
Okay, I will give the floor to Pro-Wildlife.
Thank you, Chair. This intervention is given on behalf of Pro-Wildlife and 12 other supporting NGOs. The list will be shared with the Secretariat in writing. Leopards continue to be in a dire situation. While, according to the IUCN Red List, leopards have declined in sub-Saharan Africa by more than 30% over 3 generations. CITES annual export quotas have been increased sixfold since 1983. The established quotas were expanded to their current numbers using a 40 rainfall-based model from COP6 generated with funding from the Safari Club International that resulted in what scientists have called impossible overestimates of leopard populations. As a result, virtually every COP set leopard quota since the model was developed has not been based on science and has not been sustainable. Yet, the prior intersessional review failed to address this issue. Scientific papers published since COP18 have continued to raise concerns. For example, Traubers et al. Stated that for decades, CITES bodies have endorsed apparently arbitrary quotas lacking robust scientific basis without regular adjustment. Thus, the quotas have been inadequately performing their assigned functions with the Convention's framework. Clearly, there is a need for a robust regular review. We therefore urge parties, in addition to removing Kenya's and Malawi's quotas and reducing Ethiopia's, to suspend all leopard quotas at least until decision 18.169 on developing guidance on non-detriment findings for trade in leopard hunting trophies has been developed and implemented. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Pro-Wildlife, sorry. I'll give the floor to Suko, South Africa.
Thank you, Chair. I make this intervention on behalf of Suko SA and several other observers, a list which can be provided in written form. We oppose the request made by Niger. Firstly, because of the impracticality, as should the parties decide to issue a zero quota in this instance until such time as the guidance of NDF is completed by the Animals and Plants Committee, then basically all trade needs to be halted across all species, not just leopard. Secondly, leopard in particular in Southern Africa are not in decline and are stable, with provinces such as the Eastern Cape requesting permission to export leopard to other countries. The two biggest wildlife introductions in South Africa's history, Operation Genesis and Operation Phoenix, to restock Pilanesberg and Madikwe Game Reserve, saw the movement of tens of thousands of animals of all African species thinkable. Do you know how many leopard got moved to restock these reserves, which were historic cattle farming areas that persecuted, poisoned, and shot leopard on sight? Not one. They already existed in abundance. Leopard are one of the most exclusive and elusive and cunning species in the world. They are highly successful in avoiding humans and even exist on the outskirts of one of the largest cities in South Africa, feeding on unsuspecting dogs and cats in the north of Pretoria. Having lived with leopard all my life and having grown up on one of the first pioneering game ranches in Botswana, now northwest, I can attest that the trade restrictions on leopard are officially the #1 threat to the species. I repeat, trade restrictions on leopard are officially the #1 threat to the species. The math to justify this statement is simple. A leopard kills other animals to survive, animals which in most instances are the only livelihood of people living within these rural areas. So if an animal that is worthless to me as a rural dwelling individual, i.e. a leopard, which I may not trade, is killing my cattle, a commodity I can trade, a commodity that feeds my children and keeps a roof over my family's head, what must I do? Tolerate a worthless thief or protect my livelihood? In South Africa, this is referred to as the 3 S's: shoot, shovel, and shut up. Unfortunately, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. While we respect the intentions of West Africa, they are paving and putting a target on leopard that's unnecessary and will only further persecute them. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Suko, South Africa. I've got a final request from a party, and after that I will try and sum up. I know there are other observers asking to speak, but I think we've heard a wide range of views here. So Marley, you have the floor, and then I will try and come up with a way forward.
Merci bien, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. I said earlier, leopard is a species that's important, and amongst the big cats, it remains a species that follows the lion in terms of the areas of distribution. The only places we can see the Panthera pardus is in the space between Guinea and Mali. And we have people who are trained to track the females, and they are trapped. So Mali supports the work carried out by the standing group, and we also support the amendments that have been made to this as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Marley, and I hadn't realized I'd already given you the floor before, otherwise I might not have been so generous. If you give me a few moments, please, to think of a way forward here. Thank you, colleagues. So clearly in our discussions, we have one outcome which is simple, that I think everyone was happy to amend paragraph 1A of ResComp 1014 by changing the quotas indicated for Ethiopia and removing the quotas for Kenya and Malawi. Trying to work through the different decisions and the different comments that we received, it seemed that there was a general willingness to accept 18.166, including the EU amendments. I know some parties had hesitations over that, but others indicated they were willing to compromise. So I suggest we try and take that forward as a compromise. 18.168, again, there was quite a range of views. There was quite strong opposition to the EU amendments. And perhaps as a way forward, we might, if the EU were willing to drop their suggested change to that decision, 18.168. And of course, these are existing decisions, as Switzerland made clear in their earlier intervention. And then again, there was different points of view on 18.169, parties noting that paragraph B wasn't needed, but equally it is an existing decision that we've already had. So I wondered, would parties be willing to accept that as a package? So 18.166 with the EU amendment, 18.168 without it, and 18.169 as it is at the moment, amended by the Secretariat, recognizing that some parties don't feel that developing guidance is needed and so on, but for other parties it may well be desirable. And I think Switzerland also noted that this was kind of unfinished work. So if there are any reactions to that, I will take silence as you'll be willing to live with that. I see Israel, you have the floor, and then Zimbabwe.
Thank you, Chair. We think your way forward with the decisions is fine, though we do have a problem with your first statement about paragraph 1A of the resolution. From what we heard in the discussions here, we heard a request by Niger to change the quotas to 0 and to institute a moratorium on all the trade. And according to Rule 23.5, if a representative proposes an amendment, that should be decided. And then 23.6 gives the instructions on how to deal with that proposal. So from our understanding, there was a direct request to go for a moratorium with 0 quotas for all the countries. And from our point of view, we see that as an amendment to the request, and that should be decided upon first. Thank you.
So when we were hearing the debate from here, it sounded like a suggestion. It didn't sound to us like a formal suggestion or an amendment of the resolution. We can go back to Niger and ask them if that is what they intended. But it seemed to us a general comment rather than a formally proposed amendment. Niger, do you want to clarify?
Oui, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, Chair, we thank you for coming back to us. Yes, indeed, Niger would like to call for the suspension of the quotas until there is further information on the species. So we support the proposal. Thank you.
Okay. Zimbabwe, you requested the floor. Clearly, I'm having to deal with this issue here under the rules of procedure first. So thank you, and we can maybe come back to your points later. Thank you. Okay, so we're just trying to understand, we understand your proposal, Niger, that you want to amend the resolution to suspend all leopard trophy hunting quotas. I think in your intervention, in my notes at least, you said until the NDF guidance is produced. But we're not clear what mechanism would then decide or be able to change hunting quotas. And certainly how that would happen in between conferences of the parties. So do you have any mechanism or suggested way forward there?
Oui, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, thank you, Chair. We said that this document was proposed by the Standing Committee and the Animals Committee. So certainly they will be putting forward a mechanism up until a new decision is taken.
There is no mechanism for them to do that. As far as I am aware, there are no decisions that would require them to do that. So do you wish to continue with your proposal? Is it just a proposal for zero quota without any qualifications as to how that those quotas might then be lifted?
Oui. Donc, nous soutenons effectivement.
Yes, we support the suspension of all quotas.
So dealing with this, there's clearly no consensus. I heard, I didn't hear, well, I heard some support from other parties for suspending the quotas as you propose, but equally there was also opposition to that as well. I think probably the only way to resolve this is through a vote. So I will shortly move to a voting procedure. And if parties can now start to take their seats, remain seated, and we will get the vote underway. So what we're about to vote on is the proposal from Niger, which is on agenda item 51. And the proposal from Niger would effectively change the table, which is in paragraph 1A of Res Conf 1014, Rev COP 16. And for all the parties listed there, the quotas would be revised and set at 0. South Africa, you're requesting the floor as a point of order, or? Okay, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. We're really confused about what's going on here. Surely, to set a quota, one has to actually produce a proposal and table it at a COP to consider, for parties to consider the proposal. It cannot just be amended on the fly like this. On what basis are they suggesting a 0 quota? There's no information at all at hand. There's not even a proposal.
Thank you, South Africa. There is no proposal, but under the rules of procedure, 23. 5, any representative may propose an amendment to a draft resolution, draft decision or other document, and we do have this conference resolution open for discussion in terms of amending the quotas. So clearly it's a matter for the parties to decide on here. There has been this proposal, it had support, there was opposition to it as well. I can't see any way of resolving it other than through a vote here. So that is my proposal, and I see Switzerland, do you want the floor?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Well, the proposal is not only to set a quota, there was also a condition set to that quota, and as you pointed out, there is no process for dealing with the condition that was set out by the proponents. So I don't really know how you want, if we now change the quota to 0 and don't have a process to review it, then that is a strange way of going. Thank you, Chair.
But this is what is in front of us, regardless of what you think of the merits of it. I see Zimbabwe. You can take the floor.
Thank you, Chair. This is just for Zimbabwe to add on to what South Africa and Switzerland have just raised. We are not seeing the merit of going on through the voting. Yes, it is before us, but what's the basis? Because from our understanding, there needs to be a proposal, and we need to discuss this matter. So someone without any leopard to talk about can just propose 0. We are investing in the conservation of leopards, and we have submitted the periodic reviews for leopards. You have all the information that you requested from us. Someone from the floor can just say, let's propose a 0. Chair.
Well, I understand the points you're making, and clearly there's a matter to decide here, and I've got to find a way of resolving it. And this seems to be the only way for the proposal from Niger to succeed. It would need to, as I am about to explain, because it's a substantive matter, it would need to achieve a 2/3 majority. Botswana, but then I would like to move on to try and resolve this issue. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I thought the Chair of the Animals Committee was posing a question, and I thought the Chair would actually answer. In terms of mechanism, it really is important that we are clear on what mechanism the Chair is proposing, because certainly Niger did not propose any mechanism. Thank you.
You are correct. Niger did not propose any mechanism. That is, they're simply suggesting that all leopard hunting quotas are suspended, and that is their suggested amendment, as I heard it. They did earlier talk about referring to NDF guidance, but at this stage, we're not in that position, really. So I do want to try and bring this to a conclusion. And clearly, as parties, you can vote whichever way you want on this. Zambia, do you have the floor?
I think, Chair, please allow for debate. We're not satisfied in the manner this debate is proceeding.
I regret if you're not satisfied. In the circumstances, I don't know what else I can do, really. When it's been put forward as an amendment in this manner, then it has to be resolved. And without any consensus, then there has to be a vote to try and resolve it. So I genuinely don't know what other possibilities there would be to resolve this here. So I would like to proceed with a vote, and parties can then make their own judgment. I see Niger, then South Africa.
Merci bien, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, indeed. Niger is proposing an zero export quota for all the populations in the resolution until the guidance for the making of NDFs is prepared and the parties then can submit their quotas proposals at the next COP. Thank you.
So Niger, if you're now sort of changing, I understood that you were just simply proposing zero export quotas in the table in Conference Resolution 1014. You're now suggesting conditions. I think if you're suggesting conditions, then you need to give us draft decisions or wording that goes with that. Otherwise, we can't bring it to a conclusion. Okay, I'll give the floor. A few parties requesting the floor, so I'll go to New Zealand, then Zimbabwe, and I will come back to Niger later to see if you've got some text to help take this forward, or if you wish to reconsider. New Zealand, you have the floor.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure whether this will help or not, but I notice under Recommendation 7 that we're removing the quotas for Kenya and Malawi, as agreed at COP. No, as we forgot to agree at COP18. So presumably there's a mechanism for Kenya and Malawi to resume trade in hunting trophies through an appropriate mechanism. And therefore, if that recommendation was amended to include all African states, then they would then go under the same mechanism that Kenya and Malawi would be under to go resume trade. Not that New Zealand will be supporting such a recommendation, but that may be a way forward.
Okay, thank you, New Zealand. Yeah, we're trying to work this out, but this resolution can only be amended at a COP. So it would have to wait until then. Zimbabwe, I'll give you the floor, followed by the European Union.
Thank you, Chair. We are requesting, it's a point of order, say, we are requesting for an adjournment of the meeting according to Rule 20.2. We need time.
So thank you, Zimbabwe, and we've heard your suggestion. Adjourning the session means that this session would close, would cease, and we would then be able to complete the remaining items on our agenda. The alternative might be to adjourn the debate on this particular subject. And if that's what you meant, that would make a difference.
So, Chair, we want to defer this discussion because from the turnout of events, it seems we've diverted from our original agenda item. We're discussing about the quotas of Botswana, Malawi, and Kenya. Now it's now a different subject matter, and we also need to sit down and consult. So my request is that we stop discussion on this subject matter, then we can continue on the other agenda items.
Thank you, Zimbabwe, for that clarification, and I think we will move forward. I have lots of requests from the floor, and I don't think we can continue to take them. There is a procedural motion now, so I need to work through that. So if we can clear the screen, please. So I need to ask one delegate who might wish to speak in favor of the motion from Zimbabwe to adjourn debate. If they wish to raise their flag, I will, after that, give the floor to two parties to speak against it. So I see South Africa.
We speak in favor of the suggestion by Zimbabwe. Thank you.
Thank you, South Africa. I now open the floor for two parties to speak against the proposal from Zimbabwe. So if you've got your button pressed, then you will be speaking against it, and you're not speaking on the substance of the issue, just whether you are for or against. So I saw Mali first, followed by Israel.
Chair, you have opted for a very clear idea. You were planning to go for a vote. If we weren't discussing this at length, there wouldn't have been new discussions on it. My country opposes, therefore, to the proposal that Zimbabwe has just made. Thank you.
Thank you, Mali, and I give the floor now to Israel.
Thank you. In line with what Mali just said, Rule 27, paragraph 5 says, once a vote has been called, it shall not be interrupted except by a representative on a point of order in connection with the actual conduct of the voting. So the proposal that was the debate that then ensued after you called for voting shouldn't have even have taken place, in our view, and we can't understand how a point of order could have been raised if the voting had already begun. Thank you.
So Israel, no, that isn't how I saw it. I said that I could only see voting as a way to resolve the issue, and that we should start to prepare for a vote and then ask delegates to be seated. I did not say that I had started the voting procedure or begin the formal script for it. So with that, I take it you are against the motion, or do you want me to invite another party to speak against it?
No, you understood correctly. We're against the motion to close the debate.
Right. Thank you. Then that's two parties against and two that spoke in favor. So I just need to make a motion. Yeah. So this matter needs to be decided by being put to a vote. This is a vote for the motion proposed by Zimbabwe to adjourn debate on this agenda item. It is a normal vote. I think in this case, the vote of the European Union will be cast by the individual member states, but the EU can tell me if that is incorrect. This is a procedural matter, so it will be adopted by a simple majority. And with that, if you vote yes, you are voting in favor of Zimbabwe's proposal. If you vote no, you are voting against it. I'll wait to check that the technicians are ready to take a vote.
We are prepared, Chair.
Thank you. So parties, as always, you have 40 seconds to cast your vote, and the ballot is open now. Thank you. Technicians, could you display the results on the screen, please? So clearly the proposal to adjourn debate on this particular agenda item is carried, and we will now move on to the remainder of our agenda for this afternoon. Give me a second to sort out my... Okay, technicians, I apologize, I constantly forget. Can you display the results of the parties on the screen, please? Thank you. Technicians, I think that's been round twice now, so we can remove that from the screen. Continuing with our normal agenda, or the rest of our agenda for this afternoon, I said we would go through COM documents and hope to adopt those or recommend their adoption by plenary. So I now open for discussion COP19 COM 1.5. This is a document which is related to identifying species at risk of extinction for CITES parties. It was arose from debate on agenda item 83 when I asked the proponents to go away and do some informal consultations with other parties and come up with some suggested draft decisions. These draft decisions are now in front of us, and I invite any comments from parties, but I do ask you to be very brief and very focused. Okay, I see United States.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies, but the wrong version of the document was sent in, so that COM document doesn't reflect the final work of this informal working group. As a member of the informal working group, I can provide you with changes to this document to correct what wasn't in that version.
Yes, please do.
Starting with the title of the document, draft decisions on the strategic approach to identifying, and here we would like to add the words information on, and then continue, species at risk of extinction affected by international trade, and then delete for CITES listings proposals, so ending at trade. Is that, shall I continue?
Yes, I can't actually see you at the moment, United States, but yes, please continue. We've got that one.
Okay. 19.AA starts with consider under resolution 3.4 on technical cooperation. It is our understanding that there will be a resolution on capacity building that is adopted in this meeting, and that we don't have the number of that yet. We would like to substitute that resolution for what is written there because we think it would be more appropriate. Okay, then I shall continue. This is still under 19.AA little a. The sentence goes on to provides parties requesting it with regularly updated information from any relevant studies, analysis, or other sources on identification of species at risk of extinction that are yet, the word there is protected. We'd like to change that to regulated. Cross out protected, put in regulated. Continuing on, under CITES or, and add the word may before receive. Continuing on, receive insufficient CITES, cross out the word protection and put in the word regulation. Continuing on, and that are or may be affected by international trade. From this point on, I'd like to strike the words "and technical support in the preparation of listing proposals emanating from such information. So strike and technical support in the preparation of listing proposals emanating from such information. Carrying on, working in coordination with the CITES Secretariat, CITES parties, IUCN, UNEP, WCMC, and relevant experts as appropriate, now adding the text, so that parties may consider such information, as appropriate, in the preparation of listing proposals under Resolution Conf 9.24, Rev Comp COP17 on the criteria to amend, on the criteria for amendment of Appendices 1 and 2. Shall I repeat that last sentence?
I think we've got that, United States. Thank you.
Okay. And one additional change, a very short one. If you go down to 19CC, the sentence, we're going to put an addition in, but the sentence reads, the Secretariat shall support the animals, plants, and standing committee in the implementation of Decision 19.AA and 19.BB, including through the provision of technical expertise, and this is where I'm adding the wording, and subject to external funding. And subject to external funding. Translation, interpretation as appropriate. Thank you, Chair. That was the corrections to that document.
Thank you, United States, and for bringing those changes to our attention. That's helpful. I have requests on the floor from Japan, followed by Niger.
Thank you, Chair. Japan basically supports this draft decision, but we have one comment. In the small paragraph A of 19.AA, after the wording of CITES Secretariat, CITES parties, IUCN, UNEP, WCMC, Japan would like to add the wording of FAO, regional competent authorities. That's all. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Japan. I think we've captured that. I give the floor to Niger.
Merci bien, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Please allow me, with regards to this ComDoc 1.5, to say that as we discussed when this issue was first presented, the Gambia, Niger, Nigeria, Liberia, and Senegal submitted the document 34 on the basis of the international crisis, and this continues the effort from our region to continue with this ambition to grant an international response. And the ECOWAS parties are very concerned that a huge amount of species that are threatened and could be affected by trade are not having the protection by CITES due to a lack of information or others. And many parties have expressed this concern. And we welcome the opportunity to have had the exchange with our colleagues with the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland and the United States of America. and all the parties who participated. We would like to thank all these parties for the very constructive exchanges we could have. And although we do not agree with a resolution of the parties, it's important that the parties receive appropriate information to help them protect the species that meet the criteria of CITES. We understand that it's important to have an international.
Could you, potentially speed up, really? We've got a lot to get through this afternoon now. We're well behind, and if you could perhaps conclude.
Merci bien, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, thank you, Chair. We would like to beg for forgiveness from our colleagues from the United States of America for the mistake, and we would like to thank them for the amendments that they have just given us that we couldn't include in the document, and we would like to thank all parties who contributed to these discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I give the floor to the European Union.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. On behalf of the EU and its member states, we've noted the revised draft decisions on strategic approach to identifying species at risk of extinction affected by international trade for CITES listing proposals. When we first discussed this issue in Committee 1, we expressed our interest to be part of the drafting group and regret that we were not associated to the process. We acknowledge that some parties might need technical support with preparing listing proposals, and we do not see the added value of establishing a dedicated working group. We encourage parties to seek assistance from the Secretariat in using already available tools and programs and the advice of the technical committees. The EU and its member states will continue to support range states in preparing their listing proposals as far as possible. We therefore do not support adoption of the draft decisions. We also do have some drafting suggestions, but we are worried that there is not enough time to deal with these in the plenary. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, European Union. I didn't create a drafting group, of course. I sent the parties away to do informal considerations. I think at the time I mentioned the United States and the UK. I think you raised your flag at the time and said you'd like to be part of the drafting group. And I said again, I hadn't created a drafting group, but I would encourage the parties to consult informally and come back with something. So I regret if that consultation did not happen. The only objection to these decisions seems to come from the EU, and so I have to ask you, do you wish to block consensus on them, or would you rather suggest your amendments?
Thank you much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Well, regarding our amendments, yes, we can voice our concerns. So we would prefer if paragraph small a would be limited to just technical support to the consideration whether species meets CITES listing criteria and with preparations of listing proposals. Rather than to a huge, regularly updated information system. So we would suggest to keep only the second part of this first paragraph, or at least to delete the words regularly updated, because this then seems as a long-term support. So we would rather consider appropriate to provide a one-off support to a party who requests it, but not to create too much of an administrative burden. So we understand that this is just a mandate for an intersessional process, but still we think it's better to clarify already now what we will be looking into. Thank you.
Thank you, European Union. Certainly, we can delete, regularly update it. And I think with that, could the European Union live with this, or? Okay, thank you, European Union. With that, and with no further requests from the floor, with the amendment from the United States, the EU, and Japan, I think we recommend adoption of COP19 COM 1.5. Thank you, and with that we move on to our next document, which is COP19 COM 1.6, and this is a draft amendment to proposal COP19, proposal 49 on Pau-brasil. This is an output from the small working group created to discuss this issue to see if there was a compromise way forward. With that, I open the floor for parties. I see Brazil followed by the United States.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving us the floor. As proponent, Brazil congratulates Argentina for leading the working group in such a balanced and diligent way, and also thanks all the members of the working group for the fruitful discussions we had over the past few days. As we have already expressed in this committee, Pau-brasil equinata is an endemic species to our country, which is classified as endangered due to years of intense exploitation of the tree, initially to obtain dyes and later for the music industry. Currently, Pau-brasil equinata is listed in CITES Appendix 2 with annotation #10, which basically excludes international trade of bowls for musical instruments from the control of our CITES authorities. However, this listing proved to be ineffective so far. Our original proposal contemplated the transfer of the species to Appendix 1, and we still understand that there is strong scientific evidence for Pau-brasil equinata to be included in Appendix 1. However, given manifestations expressed from the floor, we agreed to work on an intermediary proposal which keeps the species in Appendix 2 while providing for an annotation that is more restrictive than the one currently in force. In the working group, our aim has always been to work together with other parties to strengthen controls over this species. For that reason, Brazil has been extremely flexible in its initial positions, and I am quite sure that other parties will recognize our efforts to accommodate all different views on the matter. The outcome of the working group may not be exactly what we expected from the outset and considered to be ideal, but it's the expression of a pragmatic approach with a view to moving forward in the conservation of this species, which, I must reiterate, is endemic to our country. In this sense, in addition to a new annotation, the working group proposes a few decisions to be worked on during the next intersessional period. During the next intersessional period, thus, Brazil expects all parties, and not only those who were in the working group, to engage in productive discussions and commit to effective measures in matters such as enforcement, traceability, control of stockpiles, among others. Brazil also hopes that we can collaborate more to encourage the development of sustainable plantations of Pau-brasil, a decisive step to stop illegal logging of this species. All that being said, Mr. Chair, we invite all parties to support the working group proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. I give the floor to the United States, followed by Australia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The United States appreciates Brazil's efforts here to strengthen protection for this species by amending the present annotation and their pragmatic approach. We have one edit to suggest to the introductory sentence that reads, "This document has been prepared by the working group." Our understanding is this should be changed to, "This document has been prepared following, this document has been prepared after discussion by the working group." We accept the document, but we want to note for the record that this saying it was prepared by the working group is not accurate. It was after discussion by the working group. Thank you.
Thank you, United States, and we note that suggested change. I give the floor to Australia, followed by the United Kingdom.
Australia thanks Argentina for chairing the working group, the participants of the working group for the discussions on this topic, and in particular thanks Brazil for its focus on finding a proposed decision which balances the important need for protection with a workable and commensurate regulatory burden. Australia notes the important work that can be progressed intersessionally, particularly on approaches to traceability of existing musical instruments and bows that will ensure that should the need for further restrictions become apparent, they can be implemented effectively. Australia is pleased to be able to support the proposal as it is now presented.
Thank you, Australia. I give the floor to United Kingdom, then Japan.
Thank you, Chair. We'd like to recognise the efforts of the working group to come to a common position on how best to develop effective conservation measures for Pau-brasil echinata, and in particular thank Brazil for their collaborative approach on this matter. We support the new proposed annotation for Pau-brasil echinata and the accompanying draft decisions. We recognise the importance of this species both to Brazil and the musical arts globally. This proposed way forward sets out a balanced approach aimed in the sustainable management of this species and allow the species to continue to play its integral role to musicians. The UK stands ready to continue working with Brazil in the intersessional period to progress these draft decisions ahead of COP20. Thank you.
Thank you. UK, I give the floor to Japan, then the European Union, then I want to bring this to a conclusion.
Thank you, Chair. Japan appreciates the effort of Chair of the working group, the Secretariat, and government of Brazil, and other participants in the working group to conclude the document COP19 COM16. Japan supports the document. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Japan. European Union, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. On behalf of the EU and its member states, we would like to appreciate efforts made by Brazil, by the chair of the working group, as well as by member states of the working group to find a good way forward. And I think we can already now express the willingness of the EU member states to continue working with Brazil towards further discussions at COP20. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. I've got some observers requesting the floor. I'm apologising, but we don't have time now, I'm afraid, so I'm not going to offer you the floor. Thank you, and I should have thanked Argentina too, so I apologise for not doing that, for chairing this working group. We have a set of draft decisions in front of us to adopt. And with this, we have a proposed amendment to Brazil's proposal. So with that, I'm hoping that we can now adopt Proposal 49 as amended with this text that you see in front of you, and adopt or recommend the adoption of the draft decisions associated with them. And I don't see any requests from the floor, so I consider that as the conclusion of this committee and the recommendation that we make from it. Thank you. We now move on to document COP19 COM17, which is aquatic species listed in the CITES appendices, proposals for a new approach to the listing of sharks and rays. The UK chaired the working group, and I'm grateful to the UK. And I now open the floor for any comments on this document and the draft decisions contained in it. And I will take silence as consent, and if that's the case, I see China, you have the floor.
As the member of the working group, China does not support the amendment of the draft decision. Actually, China has expressed objection to this motion in the Committee 1 discussion. China supports sustainable use of fishery resources based on strict management and respects the efforts made by FAO, IFMOs, and other relevant international organizations in the management of marine fisheries. The key concern on shark and rays conservation on the CITES framework was not the consideration of a listing criteria amendment, but the abuse of such listing criteria. Many marine species that do not meet the CITES listing criteria were listed or proposed to be listed in CITES appendix, result in fishery management problems. The proposed requin sharks listing in this conference is a typical example. China supports the discussion of document 43.2, which invite more fishery bodies joining the discussion of CITES issue. It will help to promote the cooperation among CITES, FAO, IFMOs, and relevant international organizations in fishery issue. China is against the present motion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, China, and we understand you don't support these draft decisions. I've got no other requests from the floor, and so I'm assuming that the rest of the parties here are willing to adopt them. And in that case, I need to ask you, do you wish to block consensus, or with your comments noted, would you be willing to enable the adoption of these draft decisions? So China, I'm recognizing your concerns and that you do not support this as a way forward, but what I see from the floor is that all the other parties are willing to accept them. So are you?
Sorry, would you please repeat your...
So I've heard your objection that you don't like these proposed decisions, and that will be captured in the record at the meeting. However, I am reading silence here from all the other parties as being support and willingness to recommend the adoption of these decisions. So my question to you is, do you wish to block consensus on the adoption of these decisions, or can you accept them on the understanding that you have made your objections clear?
I'll take a note. Okay, accept this consensus and take a note. Okay.
Thank you very much, China, for your cooperation. We're very grateful. We now move on to COP19, COM 1.8, which was a working group created after discussions of COP19 document 65. This working group was co-chaired by New Zealand and the United States, and again I am grateful to them both. With that, and I see New Zealand requesting the floor, so I open the floor to parties, but I give the floor to New Zealand.
Thank you, Chair. Just to explain that the working group largely returned to the text that we had in Annex 4 of Doc 65 that came from the merger of the draft decisions from the Animals Committee and Standing Committee working groups. Any future reduction in scope of the Animals Committee and Standing Committee to work on issues arising from the implementation of shark listings should be addressed in these committees intersessionally. We have incorporated the text in 19b(c) submitted by Sea Shepherd Legal, which was discussed and largely supported at the working group meeting, but the precise text was not received until many members had left the meeting to discuss the Requiem Shark proposal. But we canvassed the working group, and there was a preference for that text over the existing 19b(c) text by a narrow majority of parties, but it was supported by the FAO and a vast majority of the NGO members of the working group. We've incorporated text suggested by the CITES Secretariat in 19EE(a), referencing the legal acquisition finding workshop held in Oxford after Standing Committee 74 met. We've also incorporated suggested text in 19EE(d), proposed on the floor of the committee meeting by the United States when this document was introduced, regarding trying to find a solution to problems in transferring scientific samples across various jurisdictions. With your indulgence, I'll pass the floor now to my co-chair from the United States. Thank you.
United States, you have the floor.
I believe that my co-chair covered this well, and I would just like to add that I thank the working group members for their diligent and collaborative work on this. We had a big job, and we only had to meet during one session. So thank you to working group members. Also thank you to our rapporteur, Sarah Fowler, and also thank you to the Secretariat for helping us to compile the document. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, co-chairs. So I now open the floor for any comments from parties, noting that this was a large working group with many participants. United States, you wish to intervene again? Yes.
Yes, thank you, Chair. We had a few suggested minor edits that we'd like to suggest. They're in Decision 19EE, directed to the Standing Committee. In the first paragraph, little a, we would like to retain the wording "and related assessments." So it would read, review the revised rapid guide on the making of legal acquisition findings and related assessments, and then it would change from it to they, as they relate to trade in CITES listed shark species. Then in the next line, where it states, and determine if more specific guidance is needed for listed shark species, we would suggest that read, and determine if more specific guidance is needed for CITES listed shark species. So inclusion of the word CITES before listed. And then finally, we would like to have reference to related assessments again in the next line, where it would state, including engagement with RFMOs and any capacity building which might support their role in making LAFs and related assessments, period. Thank you.
Thank you, United States. We've captured those. I don't see any other requests from the floor. So with that, I think we can conclude that this committee recommends these draft decisions in COM18 for adoption. Thank you. Right, colleagues. We need to try and move on with our agenda. We're now kind of further behind than I had hoped. And yesterday we were discussing Proposal 27 when we adjourned debate for the evening. We had this proposal was on Rhino clemis, and I think there was a range of support for the proposal as it stood, but there was also suggestions by parties that there would be more support for a proposal with reduced scope, and I was hoping that parties may have had the opportunity to consult overnight or this morning to see if there was any agreed way forward with this. So if any of the proponents or those involved in discussions wish to take the floor, I would welcome hearing from you. And I see Costa Rica. You have the floor.
Sí, buenas tardes, señor presidente.
Yes, good afternoon, Chair. The proponents of the proposal revised it, and we consider that the inclusion of the new species in the genus Rhino satisfies what the region requires. And if you would allow it, we'd like to ask Dr. Peter Paul, who is a specialist in turtle nomenclature at the Animals Committee, to speak so that we can understand the details of why these 9 species are important. And so, if I may, I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Peter Paul.
Okay, so that's the floor to the nomenclature specialist of the Animals Committee.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Costa Rica. One of the points that was raised in debate yesterday was the challenge of identifying the species, or otherwise the ease of identification of individual species. I would say, based on years of experience identifying turtles, both on pictures submitted by enforcement authorities as well as in the field and in trade, some of the rhinoclamis species are incredibly easy. They're outstanding, no question whatsoever. But some of the other species are quite challenging to separate, even with the specimen in hand. If you're dealing with young animals that are clearly marked, clearly colored, yes, you can identify them without too much trouble. But there are always aberrant animals. You have older animals that are just darkened up. And of course, these are turtles, and the rhinoclamis identification depends largely on the coloration of the head. And when you have a turtle in trade that refuses to stick out its head, it becomes extremely difficult. As a result, these animals do resemble each other quite closely in trade in the way that they are traded. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, nomenclature specialist of the Animals Committee. I give the floor to the European Union, followed by Panama.
Thank you, Chair. I speak on behalf of the EU and its member states. We had a formal, brief, informal discussion with the proponents today, and we respectfully regret that we did not reach a compromise on this proposal. And while we still doubt that the proposal to list some of the species is not in accordance with the criteria set out in Resolution Conf 1024 Ref CoP17, we have noted the mood in the room, and we have heard the intervention by the nomenclature specialist, and so we will not block consensus on this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, European Union, for your flexibility there. If I recall yesterday, there was also disagreement from the UK, Switzerland, and Guyana. Are they also in a position to show similar flexibility? Switzerland, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we are flexible. Thank you.
Thank you also for your cooperation, United Kingdom. You have the floor too.
Thank you, Chair, and yes, we agree.
And Guyana, my notes, are you willing to be flexible too? You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Given the mood in the room and everything else, we're prepared to be flexible.
Thank you very much, Guyana, and UK, Switzerland, and the European Union and its 27 member states. So on that basis, I think we can conclude that this committee recommends by consensus that Rhinoclemis species are recommended for inclusion in Appendix 2. So we can now move on to Proposal 28, which is for the species Claudius angustatus. The proponent is Mexico. We have now 6 proposals still to go, and we only have an hour and 10 minutes. So I'm going to ask everybody to be extremely brief from now on. So Mexico, if you could do a very short introduction, please. Thank you. You have the floor.
Gracias, señor.
Thank you, Chair. Mexico is presenting this proposal to include the narrow-bridged musk turtle, Claudius angustatus, in Appendix 2 in accordance with Article 2, Paragraph 2A and A of Annex 2A of Res Conf 9.24. Most of these turtles can be found in the southeast of Mexico and the rest in Guatemala and Belize. In Mexico and Guatemala, the species is classified as endangered and as it is listed as near threatened in the IUCN Red List since 1996, although that needs to be updated. The CITES Scientific Authority in Mexico coordinated a project, and the results showed that there was a low abundance in its area of distribution, with 2 to 16 individuals per hectare in historic areas of distribution, where before the species was abundant and it is now considered rare. In Mexico, this species is bred in captivity and is exported for commercial purposes, and numbers of turtles have been exported in the last decade. Although there are no permits for capture from the wild, just between 2015 and 2019, the USA reported 2,500 individuals of wild origin that came from Mexico. Around 8,000 turtles for export, which are sourced from the wild and which were illegal, were seen in the last 2 years, which makes them one of the turtles that is most intensely traded and exported illegally in Mexico. The majority of the destinations are pet markets in Asia, and they can have a value of up to $2,500 per individual. We'd like to thank those who have offered support and the guidance from the terrestrial and freshwater turtles expert group from the IUCN. We call on the support of all parties to regulate and register its international trade, as well as to combat and disincentivize illegal trafficking, whilst there are sustainable harvesting models set up locally. Thank you.
Thank you, Mexico. And when I open the floor, I'm going to try and do this by a sort of reverse process. Instead of just opening the floor where everybody pitches in and maybe says whether they support or not, I'm going to, in the interest of time, take silence as indicating consent. So in other words, if you press your button, I'm going to assume you are opposed to this proposal. And with that, I see names disappearing, so I'm going to suggest, with regret, that we can't have a fuller debate, that we adopt this proposal, or we recommend the adoption of this proposal by consensus. With no other requests from the floor, that is my conclusion. Committee 1 recommends that Claudius angustatus is included in Appendix 2 of the Convention, of the appendices. We'll now move on to Proposal 29, Kinosternum, and this is to include 2 species in Appendix 1 and the remainder of the genus in Appendix 2 that are proposed by Brazil, Colombia, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Mexico, Panama, and the United States. I invite one of the proponents, and I see Mexico, you are there, so if you could, again, introduce a proposal and to do so as rapidly as possible. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Chair. Mexico, along with Brazil, Colombia, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Panama, and the United States of America, present this proposal for the inclusion of 20 species of mud turtles of the genus Kinosternum in Appendix 2 and 2 species in Appendix 1, Kinosternum vocti and Kinosternum cora. The document 37, Information Document 37, provides additional information on the proposal. These species are distributed from the southern United States up until the north of Argentina and Paraguay. Only in Mexico, just in Mexico, we have 17 species. 8 of them are endemic, and 18 species are IUCN evaluated. Most require updating, since in recent years, in the last 10 years, the threats and populations have changed significantly. Kinosternum vocti and Kinosternum cora, which are proposed for listing in Appendix 1, are endemic to Mexico and have barely been described in the last 4 years. Both have a very small area and there is low abundance. With fewer than 1,000 Kinosternum vocti in 5 water bodies, the IUCN considers it critically endangered in its 2022 evaluation. For Kinosternum cora, up until 2020, it was last described. We had only collected 6 individuals. And despite the fact that permits for capture from the wild have not been given, there is evidence of illegal capture, and both species have been found on sale in Asia. The other 20 species proposed for inclusion in Appendix 2 meet with some of the criteria in Resolution 9.24 as having a low abundance or restricted distribution, and in 2020 only one finding in Mexico found 15,000 specimens, and that included Kinosternum turtles. These also meet the similarity criteria and present a lot of identification problems. When it comes to this, up to 50% of exemplars in museums are poorly identified. It's very difficult to distinguish juveniles, which make up the largest part of trade. According to the IUCN Turtle Identification Network of CITES, a large part of the request for identification came from the Kinosternum family, and that represents 8% of global turtles. That is a high proportion of requests. The inclusion of this species in CITES appendices will help us to strengthen measures to ensure that international trade in these turtles will not threaten their survival. So we invite parties to support their inclusion. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Mexico. And with the indulgence of parties, I'll try and take a similar approach, and therefore just look for those countries that do not support the proposal so that I can get the feel from the room. I know this is not my preferred way of doing things, but we still have 4 more proposals to go, and I would also like to conclude another summary record, if possible. So I see the European Union.
I speak on behalf of the EU and its member states. We welcome the efforts of range states to protect their native fauna. The EU assessed, based on the available scientific data, the extent to which a genus listing of Kinosternum is in line with the listing criteria, proportionate and beneficial to the conservation of the individual species. Kinosternum cora and Vogti, which are proposed for an inclusion in Appendix 1, appear to meet the biological criteria A and B of Annex 1 of the Resolution Conf 924 Rev CoP 17. Both species have been documented to occur in trade, being aware that both species have likely entered international trade under the name of Kinosternum shimaluaka years ago. On the other hand, there is insufficient indication that international trade is currently negatively affecting wild population of all Kinosternum species. Species which are traded in relevant numbers, such as Leucostomum and Scorpioides, are widely distributed and usually described to be common. Large numbers of turtles in trade are reportedly captive bred. At the same time, the genus contains few subspecies which are threatened, but do not appear to be impacted by the international trade, for example, Sonoriense and Hirtipes. We are not convinced that an inclusion of all remaining Kinosternum species in Appendix 2, according to 2A of the Convention, is justified and the appropriate measure to address the main threats to the genus, which are habitat degradation and local use. Consequently, we are inclined to not support this proposal in its current form, but we would be willing to support the listing of Kinosternum cora and Vogti in Appendix 1, as well as their clear lookalike species, as well as those species with the highest intrinsic vulnerability to overcollection. We therefore encourage the proponents to reduce this proposal to the listing of Kinosternum cora, Vogti in Appendix 1, and to Shimaluaka, Abaxillare, Angustipons, Dani, Hirtipes, and Sonoriense in Appendix 2. Thank you, Chair.
Could you just read your suggestions for the reduced scope of the proposal?
Of course.
And whether you're suggesting that as a formal amendment or just an encouragement to the proponents?
So just to clarify that we are not proposing a formal amendment, we just encourage proponent to reduce the proposal. And the specific species would read cora, Vogti in Appendix 1. And in Appendix 2 it would be Shimaluaka, Abaxillare, Angustipons, Dani, Hirtipes, and Sonoriense.
Okay, we've got all those. Thank you, European Union. I'll come back to the proponents about your suggestions shortly. I see Marla requesting the floor, so I assume you also have some objections to the proposal.
Monsieur le Président.
Chair, first of all, we would like to congratulate the countries proponent of the changes for this species, given the threats that are included in this proposal. This means that there is an urgent need to save these animals nowadays. At least 20 range states are concerned by this proposal. Mexico.
Sorry to interrupt you. I take it you're indicating support for the proposal. Yes?
Tout à fait.
You wish to...
Absolutely, Chair. Absolutely. So I'll stop here.
I'm just trying to look for those parties that have concerns or opposition to the proposal at this stage. Thank you. So we've heard from the European Union, who are feel there's a case for the inclusion of some species, well, both species in Appendix 1 and only some of the species in the genus in Appendix 2. So I'd just like to go back to the proponents and to ask them whether they're willing to reduce their scope or not. Mexico, you have the floor.
Gracias.
Thank you, Chair. Although this conversation has already been had with the European Union, we reiterate to the importance of keeping the proposal in full for several reasons. Indeed, because many of the samples in museums are badly identified, and if there is indeed a problem with this species, is difficulty to be identified in juvenile species, juvenile members. We don't usually intend to have a division in the listing. That would be very complex, with species in Appendix 1 and species in Appendix 2 and species with identification problems that are not included. This would complicate the implementation of the convention, and therefore we do not see this as a viable option. Rather, quite the contrary. We would need more experts in order to carry out an adequate identification of all this genus. All the seized individuals are an indicator that shows that other species of this genus could be included in the illicit trade. Thank you.
Thank you, Mexico. So you've made your position very clear. So that, I think, means I have to go back to the European Union and ask you what you would like to do, given that I'm not seeing any other objections from the rest of the room.
Thank you, Chair. To be brief, we have voiced our concerns, but we support listing of some of the species, and therefore we will not block consensus in this case as well. Thank you.
Thank you, European Union, for your cooperation. Of course, we will make a note in the record of the concerns that you expressed. I have Guatemala asking for the floor. Do you wish to object, or are you speaking in support? Because I'm about to conclude here that we can adopt this proposal.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Chair. Quoting you on your words, it's important that this point be made. We support the proposal by the different proponents, but we refuse the European Union's proposal, which leaves 3 species that are found in Guatemala out of it. Acutum scorpioides, which are 3 species that are found in the international trade, and therefore we cannot accept the counter-proposal made by the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you, Guatemala. I think we've already resolved that issue. The European Union have said they're not going to block consensus after Mexico, speaking for the proponents, were unwilling to reduce the scope of their proposal. So with that, I conclude on Proposal 29 that this committee recommends by consensus that Kinosternum species, except the 2 species to be included in Appendix 1, are recommended for adoption by this committee. In other words, we include Kinosternum cora and Kinosternum vocti in Appendix 1 and all the other species of Kinosternum species in Appendix 2. So that is the recommendation from this committee, and we can now move on to proposal number 30 for 2 species of Staurotypus, and the proponents are El Salvador and Mexico for inclusion in Appendix 2, and I invite Mexico again to make the introduction.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much, Chair. I hope that my throat will allow me to continue speaking. I am sure otherwise that the El Salvador delegation will be able to make the intervention. Mexico and El Salvador are proposing include Staurotypus tripocatus in Appendix 2 in accordance with Article 2, Paragraph 2A of the Convention, Resolution CoP19 and include the Staurotypus salvini because of the lookalike species. So the tripocatus can be found in the south of Mexico, and it includes, and this is 70% of its distribution, whereas the Staurotypus salvini can be found in Mexico, Guatemala, and El Salvador. Mexico considers the Staurotypus tripocatus as threatened under its legislation, although the nearest evaluation by the authority characterizes it as nearly threatened. Both species are near threatened in their habitat and that are very vulnerable due to their late maturity, low productivity, and low survival rates of the juvenile. And according to the scientific authority, their redistribution is between 4 and 35 individuals, whereas historically we could have more than 40 individuals. So where it used to be abundant, it is now a rare species. Mexico has legally registered more than 20,000 individuals that have been ranched. It has not authorized the export of wildly collected specimens, but we have found individuals declared as wildly collected in other countries. It seems to be a species in high demand in the Asian market, where the price of an adult can reach up to $1,000. In 2020, twice there were seizures of these individuals. The species are difficult to differentiate between themselves, and their identification is particularly complicated in young individuals. And it's also believed that some Staurotypus salvini have been traded legally and illegally as Staurotypus tripocatus. We would like to thank the support in the information and the guidance of the group of specialists of terrestrial turtles of IUCN on the preparation of this proposal, and given the conservation status and the increased demand in the international trade, we would like to request all parties' support in order to include these two species in Appendix 2, and I understand that El Salvador would also like to take the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mexico. El Salvador, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. El Salvador, as a co-proponent of this very important proposal, would like to express its strongest support to the inclusion of these two species in the Appendix 2. In our country, we only have Staurotypus salvini, a species which is threatened in national lists due to its high demand in the international pet trade, as well as its consumption and use in the local communities. It has suffered huge habitat loss, replaced by sugarcane. That's the biggest threat. We have seen a loss in the population. This proposal that meets the criteria, and therefore we believe it's important to guarantee the conservation of the species. Thank you.
Thank you, El Salvador. Again, in the interest of time and with my apologies, I will take a kind of reverse approach to this. I will open the floor from parties, but I would really like to hear from parties that have concerns or that are opposed to this proposal. And if no one ends up being opposed, then we may be able to move forward as before by adoption by consensus. So I don't see any requests from the floor on this occasion. Thank you, parties. So with that, I conclude that this committee recommends that Stereotypus salvinii and Stereotypus triporcatus should be included in Appendix 2. Thank you. We now move on to Sternotherus species, Proposal 31, again for the inclusion in Appendix 2, and the proponent, the United States of America. So, United States, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The United States is pleased to introduce Proposal 31 for the inclusion of all species of musk turtle in the genus Sternotherus species in Appendix 2 for consideration by the Conference of the Parties. I'll be brief. Endemic to the fresh waters of North America from the extreme southeastern portion of Canada, south along the eastern portion of the United States to Florida. Like live musk turtles are exported primarily to East Asia for commercial purposes. For the years between 2013 and 2019, almost 1.5 million live musk turtles were exported from the U.S., with the majority of the specimens, 60%, being wild source. Without a complete picture of the population size of these species, it is difficult to determine whether or not this level of harvest and export is sustainable. Although U.S. states have legislation that regulates the collection of musk turtles and other freshwater turtles, these species are still harvested from the wild in parts of their range within the United States and exported internationally in large commercial quantities. Inclusion of musk turtles in CITES Appendix 2 would complement U.S. state and other domestic measures and ensure the acquisition of specimens entering international trade were biologically sustainable as well as legal, and will not be detrimental to the survival of the species. We therefore urge all parties to join us in conserving our endemic turtles and support this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, United States. And again, in the interest of time, I'm going to take a kind of reverse approach and just ask if any parties that are opposed to this proposal wish to raise their flags. I don't see any requests from the floor. Thank you. So I think we can conclude that this committee can recommend by consensus that Sternotherus species be included in Appendix 2. So I now move on to Apolloni species and Proposal 32, again for the inclusion of, inclusion in Appendix 2 and the proponent, the United States. So you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The United States is pleased to present Proposal 32 to transfer North American softshell turtles consisting of 3 species in the genus Apollon from Appendix 3 to Appendix 2 of CITES, except for the subspecies that is already included in Appendix 1. Sources predominantly show a growing number of exports with some points of contradiction. Harvest rates are nearly impossible to quantify because of regulations surrounding softshells in the United States operate at the state level and greatly vary. This includes legalities surrounding commercial turtle farming in the United States. Though they have been of economic benefit in some areas, there are concerns surrounding self-sustainability and the ability to satiate demand. The capture of wild adults for parental breeding stock and genetic diversity is common, and many farms do not operate in a closed system, making it impossible to discern wild source versus captive bred individuals. Outside of commercial farming, reports of North American softshell turtle species being poached and sold to Asian markets have repeatedly surfaced. The United States supports the inclusion of this species in CITES Appendix 2 to ensure sustainable use of the species through a regulated and legal trade. While states within the United States may have regulations and quota for harvest of abalone species, international regulation is required to ensure the harvest of wild specimens are not reducing populations to a degree where the species' survival becomes threatened. An Appendix 2 an Appendix 2 inclusion is important to help mitigate threats associated with trade. Therefore, we urge parties to support this proposal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, United States. And again, I will take the same approach and see if there is any concerns or any parties that wish to express opposition. And I don't see any again, and I'm taking that to indicate that parties feel that they can support this proposal. So with that, I conclude again that this committee recommends that Proposal 32 for abalone species be included in Appendix 2. And we can move on to what is our final document, final proposal to amend the appendices, but not our final document for today. I want to do another summary record. So this is Proposal 33 for Nielsonia lethii to transfer from Appendix 2 to 1 with the proponent India. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. India is pleased to introduce CoP19 Prop 33 to transfer Leith's softshell turtle, Nielsonia lethi, from Appendix 2 to Appendix 1 of the Convention to the COP for adoption. Nielsonia lethi is a large freshwater softshell turtle which is endemic to peninsular India, and it inhabits rivers and reservoirs. The species has been subject to intensive exploitation. Over the past 30 years, it has been poached and illegally consumed within India, but has also been illegally traded abroad for meat and for its calypsy. The habitat of the species is in decline due to sand mining, pollution and hydrological alterations of rivers, and so the geographic range of the species is shrinking. The population is estimated to have declined by 90% over the past 30 years, so much so that the species is now difficult to find. It is classified as critically endangered by IUCN. Nielsonia lethi is listed in Schedule 4 of India's Wildlife Protection Act 1972, which gives it protection from hunting as well as trade. However, poaching and illegal trade of protected turtle species is a major challenge in India, with seizures of over 10,000 specimens reported every year. Species level identification of seized specimens is also a challenge. Tortoise and freshwater turtle are targeted for international pet, meat, and calypy trade, as well as for illegal domestic consumption. Nielsonia lethi qualifies for listing on CITES Appendix 1 since it is affected by trade and meets the biological criteria found in Resolution Conf 9.24 Annex 1, specifically Category A within bracket small I and 5, B, I and B4 and CI. Given the decline in population and habitat of a species, any actual or potential trade in a species will have a detrimental impact on its status. A CITES Appendix 1 listing would ensure that, number 1, illegal international trade in the species does not take place for commercial purposes. Number 2, international trade in captive bred specimens only takes place from registered facilities. And number 3, higher and more proportionate penalties are provided for illegal trade of the species. We wish to draw the attention of the parties of IUCN and traffic's analysis of COP19 proposals, as both of which conclude that the species appear to meet the criteria for an Appendix 1 listing. Chair, we reiterate the concerns we have voiced about the global conservation status of all the tortoise and freshwater turtles and the need for us to take urgent actions to protect these species. We urge the parties to support our proposal to transfer Nelsonia lethi to Appendix 1 of the Convention. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, India. And again, to try and save time, I will take the same approach, again, with apologies. It's not the way I would normally want to conduct a debate, but is there any opposition from parties to this proposal to uplist Nelsonia lethi to Appendix 1? I don't see any, and so again, I will conclude that this committee recommends by consensus that this species be transferred from Appendix 1 to Appendix 2. And that brings us to the end of our proposals to amend the appendices and agenda item 89, if I remember the numbers correctly. We haven't finished our business yet. I will just end with an apology about the debate. I think it's always unfortunate, very often in the closing session of a COP, where listing proposals or amendment proposals get rushed and don't get the full chance for a proper debate. And I haven't given the floor to observers, and I'm very conscious of that. I have, however, tried, through the last 2 weeks to give as much airtime as I could, both to parties and to observers. I think I will check in a moment with the Secretariat to make sure that there are no loose ends that I have missed and that I need to wrap up before we draw this session to a conclusion. But I would like to conclude with a summary record document. So COP19, COM1, REC 11, we are able to discuss. It's been on the web in 3 languages for a sufficient period. This document is a summary of the 11th session of Committee 1, which took place on the 21st of November. So I open it for comments and corrections from parties. So I see Israel, followed by the United States.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, my comment is on your previous comment on, we just noted that earlier today we adjourned document 51, and we just wanted to understand your direction on when that would be taken up again, since we adjourned it and now we're about to close the session. Thank you.
I'm going to come back on that before I finish, but that's one of the things I want to discuss with the Secretariat. Thank you. So, United States, you have the floor.
Chair, we have a comment on page 5. Basically, the sentence that reads, Proposal COP19, Proposal 7 to include Cerodactylus jayaporinensis in Appendix 2 was accepted by consensus. That was, in fact, proposal number 15, not 7. Thank you.
Thank you, United States, and we've captured that correction. So if you give me a moment, I will just check with the Secretariat about loose ends, and I will also come back on document 51. So we do have some housekeeping, some loose ends to tie up before we come back on document 51 we're just discussing. As we ran through the various documents and documents, we forgot, or we overlooked, I overlooked, the need to delete some decisions. So under item 65 on sharks and rays, when we were discussing COM18, we overlooked the need to delete decisions 18.218 to 18.225. So I think given that we adopted decisions which essentially supersede those, that we propose, or I propose, that we delete those decisions. Under item 77 on Queen Conch, we overlooked the deletion of decisions 18.275 to 18.280. Under item 64.1 and 64.2 on marine turtles, when we were discussing COM14, we overlooked the deletion of decisions 18.210 to 18.216. And under item 82 on medicinal and aromatic plants, when we were discussing COM13, we overlooked the deletion of decisions 18.300 to 18.303. Okay, okay. And of all these proposed deletion of decisions were actually in the original document, so I should have picked them up at the time. So I take it there are no objections to the deletion of those decisions, and I don't see any, and we'll come back in a moment. So on document 51 and quotas for leopard hunting trophies, we had a vote and there was a decision to adjourn the debate. I don't know if that gave parties for time to consider the issue and see if we might be able to resolve it. I suggest we can open that up now and see if there is any scope to find a way forward before we close this committee. But if not, we will perhaps have to leave that item until the final plenary to resolve. So, so I can go back to the original proponents, Niger, and ask if they still want to maintain the way forward that they were suggesting, to propose 0 export quotas for all the parties listed in paragraph 1A of ResConf 1014, or whether they've had time to reflect. So you have the floor.
Merci bien, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. In our intervention on agenda item 51, we made a formal recommendation to establish 0 export quotas for all parties in paragraph 1A of Resolution Conf 10.14 Rev COP 16 until the NDF guidance in Decision 18.169 paragraph C is prepared and implemented. You requested us to explain the process by which these zero export quotas could be revised. We hereby provide our proposal. I will read it slowly. I can also provide this in writing. The Conference of the Parties amends paragraph 1A of Resolution Conf 10.14 Rev COP 16 on quotas for leopard hunting trophies and skins for personal use by removing Kenya and Malawi and changing quotas indicated for the remaining parties with zeros. The decision directed to the Secretariat, Decision 18.169 Rev COP 19. The Secretariat shall, subject to external resources, A, in cooperation with range states and relevant experts, develop guidance that can assist parties in the making of non-detriment findings for trade in leopard hunting trophies in compliance with Resolution Conf 10.14 Rev COP 16. Share the draft guidance with the Animals Committee for its review. Make such guidance available on the CITES website and encourage its use by relevant parties. And B, encourage and support all parties included in Resolution Conf 10.14 Rev COP 16 to exchange information and lessons learnt regarding the process for determining that such quotas are non-detrimental to the survival of the species in the wild. Directed to parties with quotas established under Resolution Conf 10.14 Rev COP 16. Decision 18.166. All parties which have quotas for leopard hunting trophies established under Resolution Conf 10.14 Rev COP 16 are encouraged to use the guidance in Decision 18.169 Rev COP 19 paragraph A to prepare proposals for consideration at future meetings of the Conference of the Parties for quotas that are non-detrimental to the survival of the species in the wild. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so we've heard those proposals. I'm not sure if everyone has been able to capture that or not. So you've given us additional text. So we now have a clear idea of the proposal by Niger. As before, I don't think there was consensus. So we can attempt to resolve this with a vote no, if parties are willing. But South Africa and the European Union, South Africa, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. We object to this process. I'd like to refer all parties and the Chair to Resolution Conf 9.21 Rev COP 18 on interpretation and application of quotas for species included in Appendix 1. Under that resolution, sorry, now what happened to it? Paragraph 1A, a party wishing the Conference of the Parties to establish a quota for a species included in Appendix 1 or to amend an existing quota should submit its proposal to the Secretariat with supporting information, including details of the scientific basis for the proposed quota, at least 150 days before a meeting of the Conference of the Parties. This is certainly not the process that we see before us right now. Thank you.
So we take your point, South Africa. We'll come back, but I give the floor to the European Union, followed by Kenya.
Thank you, Chair. We are, frankly, a bit confused about the procedure here, because we think that the submission by Niger is really a very substantive amendment of a document that has been put forward. Is made here on the floor. We have not been able really to consider it properly. And now, if I understood correctly from you, you are intending to put this to a vote instead of the original proposal. So we were just wondering what is the rule of procedure that would mean that such proposal that is put forward in the last minute, basically, is put to a vote before the original one. So that's just a question for information. Thank you, Chair.
So my understanding and interpretation is that under Rule 23.5, any representative may propose an amendment to a draft resolution, draft decision, or other document. I can then permit discussion and so on. But when an amendment is moved, the amendment should be decided on first. Now, clearly, Niger has added more detail to their amendment than they had before, but I did go back to them and ask them what the process was that they intended to achieve their stated aim, which was 0 export quotas until the non-detriment finding guidance was available. So in effect, that's what they've done, and that is what I'm trying to decide on. It is a difficult process, I appreciate. I do have 2 other parties asking for the floor. So I'll give the floor to Kenya, then Canada.
Thank you, Chair. I want to correct some statement by, I think, New Zealand previously. Kenya stopped trophy hunting in 1977, and we do not wish to reopen it in the near future. And I think we would wish to have this issue concluded amicably so that we have Kenya deleted from these records. Thank you.
Thank you, Canada. I give the floor to, thank you, Kenya. I give the floor to Canada.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for allowing us to take the floor.
Canada shares the concerns raised by South Africa and the European Union on this new amendment to the decisions that we are considering under document on leopard quotas. I recognize, Chair, the rule on amendments to decisions and resolutions does not provide for any information to the Chair regarding scope. However, it seems to me that the intent of the original document, as discussed by the Standing Committee, was a cleanup exercise. We were righting some mistakes from previous, and we were correcting a minor issue. So it was a fairly narrow document and a fairly narrow conversation. Thus, while again I understand that the rules are being followed, it does seem to be out of the spirit of the intent of the document and the discussion that was had at Standing Committee to extend and include the information and the changes that Niger is proposing. So I am concerned that we are perhaps taking that rule a bit too literally, and that's a question for us to reflect on in a different place. In this regard, should we continue to consider the amendments proposed by Niger, I'm presuming we will follow the same set of rules and consider the amendments being proposed first prior to taking a decision on the full document. And again, Canada has significant concerns about the very different substance and scope of the proposals being placed by Niger compared to the original document that was available for parties to consider in the appropriate amount of time. Thank you, Chair.
So thank you, Canada, and we take your comments on board, and you are correct that the proposal from Niger is significantly different from the original document we were discussing. But what I am trying to do, as you kind of suggested, is follow the rules as we have them in front of us. But I saw a request from the floor from the United States, followed by the European Union.
The United States wishes to align itself with the views expressed by Canada. Thank you.
So I'll give the floor now to the European Union, followed by the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Chair. I thank you for the clarification as regards the rule that is that you are applying in this case. I would like to share the EU and its member states support the comments by Canada, and we oppose this proposal by Niger and respectfully request Niger to withdraw it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll give the floor to the United Kingdom, and then Indonesia, and then I'll go back to Niger to ask them to reflect on the comments. This is clearly quite a divisive issue, and it is coming very late in the day and is going to be difficult for us to resolve. But United Kingdom, Indonesia, then Niger.
Thank you, Chair, and I will be brief. I think we share the concerns that we've just heard from our colleagues in South Africa, in the EU and Canada, and I would also echo the request that this is withdrawn. Thank you, Chair.
Indonesia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Indonesia also shares the same view with South Africa, EU and Canada.
Thank you, Indonesia. I give the floor to China, then Benin, and that's it. Then I'm coming back to Niger and with a question to them.
Thank you, Chair. China concurs with Canada's opinion, and we must think that this change is very much related to appendices. It's very much like the annotation to appendices. So when we make some amendments, we have to think about its scope. The scope is very important. We can only narrow the scope rather than expand the scope. So we agree with Canada's opinion. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think, excuse me, I think I said Benin, then I will go back to Niger.
Merci.
Thank you, Chair. I certainly want to follow the spirit of the proposal from Niger, because we're looking at a species. The proposal is to have 0 quota for the export of the leopard. And it's not a new quota. Why do we hear that we have to submit it 150 days before the COP? And if Niger would like to do this, I think we should take into account their proposal for amendment.
Thank you, Benin. So Niger, I'm going to come back to you. You've heard the comments from a large number of parties that are asking you to withdraw this proposal because it is being made very late in the day. It is disruptive, and it is going to make it difficult for us to come to any conclusion here. It is significantly different from the document that we originally had in front of us and on which we were having a debate. And if you wish to pursue this approach, you could, of course, bring it forward to a future conference of the parties, when the parties would then have the chance to consider the proposal in depth and in advance of a future COP. So, Niger, are you willing to withdraw your proposal to enable us to make progress at this COP, please? Thank you.
Merci bien, monsieur.
Thank you very much, Chair. As my colleague from Benin has said, it's not here about determining new quotas, but rather establishing 0 quotas until the next COP. Niger agrees with the chair, and we wish to carry out a vote, firstly on the removal of Kenya and Malawi. Thank you.
So Mali, Niger, the proposal to remove Kenya and Malawi from the table in ResComp 1014 was in the original Standing Committee proposal. And if that was the case, and if we were dealing with that, then that seemed very likely to be adopted, because I didn't hear anybody opposing that at all. However, your amendment was to have 0 quotas, and it seems that you are unwilling to withdraw. I would very much rather just deal with the original document. If I'm honest, I think there's a chance of getting some kind of way forward there. Taking this to the vote is going to take us quite a bit of time that we don't really have now. We're 6 minutes before this session is due to close. So if you want to push this to a vote, then it would have to be on your original proposal, which would be 0 quotas for everyone that was in that table. So Niger, I would like to know, could we in the interests of trying to build a consensus and keep parties together on this document and proposal, avoid what will be a difficult and divisive vote, I think. So I'm in your hands, but I think the best way forward is to remain with the original document. And I've been taking, you have the floor, Niger.
Merci bien, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Niger does not want to present an obstacle to consensus, so we will withdraw our proposal.
Thank you, Niger. So we can now go back to where we were quite a while ago. If I can remember correctly, I was summing up that I had seen no objection to the recommendation in paragraph 7 of the document 51, and that therefore I was going to conclude that we could adopt that. I think I had suggested that in 18.166 that there was scope potentially for compromise, so that that parties could accept the decision with, in that case, the amendments proposed by the EU. I think on 18.168, there wasn't any consensus on the EU's suggestion, and so I would suggest, if they were willing, that we might go forward without that. And although I know there were reservations from some parties about 18.169, I wonder if we could live with those in the interest of compromise and coming to a conclusion, noting that these are existing decisions, in effect, that would be carried forward, and recognizing the comments made by a number of parties expressing their concern. Could we live with that as a way forward? I don't see any further requests from the floor, so I'm going to conclude that we do that. So thank you, colleagues, for your cooperation. I'm sorry that took a while to resolve and was a difficult process, and that I perhaps didn't steer you through it as well as I might. But I think that is actually the final item on our agenda. And I'm looking at the time, and I think the only thing that remains for me to do is to make a few closing remarks. So I'm going to ask the interpreters if they could give us a few more minutes.
Of course, sir.
Yeah. So, dear delegates and colleagues, we have now concluded our business for Committee 1, and it only remains for me to do some closing remarks. And I'm now going to ask myself to be brief and then ignore it like a lot of you seem to ignore me. But I have got the timer running in front of me here. So we've been in each other's company now for 48 hours, I think, in total, almost 2 full days, and I've enjoyed listening to all your interventions. Well, almost all of them, if I'm honest. But now you have to listen to me for a while, and the doors are locked, so you can't escape. When I opened Committee 1, I began with making a lot of thanks. And I need to close with thanks, but this time with more thanks than I began with. And first, of course, I need to thank very warmly our very generous hosts and hospitable hosts here at Panama, who have made this a wonderful conference, but also helped to make this committee work very successfully. They provided us with great facilities, and they've been supported by fantastic staff and volunteers. So I'm very grateful, and I'm sure we'll give lots of thanks to Panama in the closing days. I'd like to thank the Secretary General herself for her guidance and support to me, and for her leadership of the Secretariat and its work overall. But I do need to make a very special thanks to the Secretariat as a whole. And it's fairly clear that without the support of the Secretariat, I would not have been able to do this job at all, really. So there's a whole range of people who have assisted me. There's David, Karen, Isabel, HJ, Martin, Juan Carlos, Sophie, Haruko, Thea, Helen. I could go on and on and on, but their work has been incredible, and so much work gets done behind the scenes that you don't see with the Secretariat, with the staff working late into the night to make sure this COP runs smoothly. And in particular, I've been very fortunate to be guided by two previous Committee 1 chairs. David as my right-hand man, and Karen as my left-hand woman, if that's a phrase, have been a great source of advice to me as we've been through this process. And David in particular has been by my side almost entirely through Committee 1, and his 40-year experience of working in the convention has been invaluable. So I am, very grateful to those both as well. And I was trying to remember with David how long we had known each other. And I think we bumped into each other in the 1980s when we were in the same conservation agency. And one of the things you don't know about David, he can kick me under the table and his facial expression doesn't change. But so if you see me wince occasionally, you know what it was. So I hope that you, the parties and observers, truly value the enormous work that the Secretariat does for you, often unseen and perhaps underappreciated. So I would ask that we give the Secretariat a big round of applause. There's more thanks to come, I'm afraid. There's thanks also to my fellow chair of Committee 2, Redden Ollerenshaw, who has been a great source of help and support also, and has a much tougher job to do in Committee 2, I think, than in Committee 1. I certainly couldn't have done the chairing of Committee 2, and probably some of you are thinking I can't even do the chairing of Committee 1, but we won't go there. I do, of course, have other people to thank. The interpreters and translators. I'm never sure how people manage to do simultaneous interpretation. The translators are working on documents, again, all through the night. We have the technical staff here providing support with the microphones and the voting system. And for all of those who've helped, behind the scenes to make this work, again, I would like to express our thanks in the usual way. So thank you to all of those. And I also thank you, parties and observers, for your constructive approach to debate, your hard work, and your tolerance and forbearance of my occasional, perhaps many, slip-ups along the way. And I do genuinely believe that whilst opinions on many topics might be divided, and they are occasionally polarized, I do feel that we do overall have more in common than divides us. And I think we should focus on that as we go forward. It's also been great for me to see so many familiar faces here. My only regret is that I've not had a chance to spend so much time with any of you, really. I have to thank my host agency, JNCC, the Joint Niche Conservation Committee in the UK, and the UK itself for sparing my time to come and do this, to prepare for and chair this committee here, especially on a topic which is no longer my job, And I would also like to thank my JNCC colleagues, some helping who are on the UK delegation, some helping as rapporteurs, some still back in the UK doing the day job. It's not often I get a chance to publicly praise them, but I would like to say how immensely proud I am of them as a team. They've done loads of work in the preparation to this COP. I've been working separately on my preparation. So I'm very proud of them all, and I should also note the absence of some colleagues, and especially a close colleague, Alison Littlewood, who couldn't be here for personal reasons. I think I've been to every COP with her since COP11, and her not being here seems very strange. Anyway, this is turning into an Oscar speech, and so I should foreshorten it a bit, but I will continue by thanking my family and the dog, because they haven't seen much of me for the last few months, nor will they. Anyway, that's enough thanks, I think. So a few closing thoughts, really. We put enormous effort, energy and commitment into a COP over an intense period of 2 weeks. And we go away at the end of that, sometimes feeling elated that an amendment proposal has been adopted, or maybe disappointed that one has. But very often we go away and our shoulders slump, we relax, we put our feet up, and we forget about things for a while. But I think it's important to remember that what we agree here is only the start. Adding to the species to the appendices, agreeing decisions on a way forward, we need to put the same energy and commitment into making all those things work in practice that we do into our efforts here at a COP. And I think we should also remember that sometimes downlistings, everybody focuses on adding species to the appendices or uplisting, but very often downlistings where we're able to do that because a species has been subject to positive conservation action and has recovered, is an indication of conservation success that we probably don't celebrate enough. And of course, we had examples here with the Aleutian cackling goose, for example. While we're here, we're often focused on the detail, looking at the wording of draft decisions and text here and all that kind of stuff. And we often forget the bigger picture. And in a week or so, I, like others, will be heading to Montreal for the CBD's COP15 for a change of scene and a change of temperature too, where we hope, though Canada always gives you a very warm welcome, I should say, where we hope to adopt a new global biodiversity framework. And that big picture is important because our work in CITES doesn't happen in isolation. What we do contributes to the bigger global goals of halting and reversing biodiversity loss and contributing to wider goals then on sustainable development and climate change. So I urge you all, of course, to continue the great work. I have been speaking now for far too long. I know it's well past the time that we're meant to finish. So I only think, for me, it remains to echo the immortal words of the Spice Girls and stop right now. Thank you very much. And for those of you who know the song, on the dance moves, I bring this final session of Committee 1 at COP19 to a close. So, gracias a todos. Necesito una cerveza. Gracias.